Dag iedereen. Ik ga weer naar het Engels overschakelen, aangezien dat we nogal wat Engelse bezoekers hebben vanavond. That's the only word in Dutch I will say. No panic. Welcome everybody. We're using a mic now for the first time because last time there was someone complaining that he couldn't hear everything, and I see he went off. Anyway, it's good for the recording as well because every talk has been recorded and will be put on in Flanders Fields Museum YouTube channel. I have the great honor to present tonight Jeremy Gordon-Smith. I have already guessed that this is Jeremy, who's a therapeutic counsellor based in southwest London.
Yeah.
However, he is also a photographer and a family historian, and his research into his large family archive has resulted in 2 books. And I'll start with the second book because that will come to what it's about tonight. The second book, Beauty in the Shadows, chronicles the life of his great-great-aunt Viola Bawtree through both World Wars, providing a vivid picture of life on the home front. However, today he will talk to us about his first book,
which is that one.
He will talk about his first book, Photographing the Fallen. Yeah,
you've got it.
The museum's copy, but wait, you're welcome to show your copies, of course. Which is the biography of his great-uncle Ivan Bawtree. Patrick, kan je wel zien nog plekken? Which is the biography of his great-great-uncle Ivan Bawtree, who was a war graves photographer on the Western Front during the First World War. Not without importance is that Jeremy borrowed in Flanders Fields Museum what was the camera of his great-great-uncles and some documents of Ivan Bawtree for the Forevermore exhibition. So actually we squeezed 2 things in one opportunity. We returned the loan to Jeremy, and at the same time it's a great opportunity for having him talk on his great uncle. Jeremy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And it's wonderful to be here in Ypres to do a talk I've done a number of times, but only in England. And Ypres was such an important place to my great-great-uncle Ivan. It was a place he visited on numerous occasions and was billeted or stationed in at times as well. So to be able to talk from the Cloth Hall about his photographs is amazing, yeah, because I mean the Cloth Hall features quite a lot in his photographs in a somewhat different condition to what we see now. Yeah, so here you can see a photo of a cemetery which is not far from here, Maple Copse. You can see kind of the state of it as it was then, and we'll kind of have a look at quite a lot of Ivan's photography that shows how things were during the First World War and afterwards. So, how did I get into all of this? Well, back in 1991, the early 90s, I was studying World War I at school. At the same time, my grandmother passed away, and my dad came into some memorabilia, and some diaries were discovered inside an old desk. There's the 1918 diary, which I happen to have here as well, because that was also on loan to the museum. And I was instantly fascinated by these diaries. I tried to understand what the place names were. Didn't have the use of Google Maps back then, so it was hard to know what was what. I mean, you can read Abbeville just there quite clearly, but there were lots of other names that were a lot harder to... Lots of names, because he went to so many places, so there's constantly he's listing places that he would travel to. And then a large part of Ivan's photos, there's about 600 glass plate negatives that were discovered in the mid-70s. And these were donated by Ivan to the Imperial War Museum. I have one of the glass plates here. So this is actually of, you can't probably see actually what it is without me shining a light through it, but I will have a slide of it later. But the glass plate looks like this. This is of Lissenhoek military cemetery, which is just down the road from here. So there were 600 of those in Ivan's cellar, and my dad's cousin David kind of suggested to Ivan, who was considering what to do with them. One of his options was just to, throw them out. Suggested, oh, why not give them to the IWM? So that's where they went. And then I got to see them in the 1990s. My dad took me to see the collection, which were in a load of prints in these thick albums in the museum. And they're only kind of 6x4 inch prints, quite small, each captioned. And I tried to photocopy some of them using a very poor quality photocopier there, and we tried to take photographs of them, although we were suddenly told not to. But yes, it's kind of seeing the different range of photos of ruins, ruined buildings, of war graves, of tanks, of all sorts of things. And I was able to put on a little exhibition at my school using these diaries and other bits that I found. Then in 2012, a whole load more material came my way from my this relative David Bawtree, who has a habit of he drip feeds me stuff. He'll often tell me, I found something of interest. Then he'll tell me, I can't remember what it is, and I'm not sure where I put it. Eventually it comes my way. He did this to me with the camera. Told me he'd found some cameras, and then when I went round to see him, he said, I'm not sure where it is. I can't remember where I put it. Some months later, I managed to get it from him. He was looking for a book, and there it was on a shelf somewhere. So a lot of material came my way. I became the person that was kind of the family historian, the one to give this kind of stuff to. And Ivan's archive is the archive that keeps giving. I keep finding more stuff. I've got stuff I wish I had before I published my book. Maybe I'll do a second edition, I don't know. But Ivan's from a place called Sutton in Surrey. It was Surrey back then. It's a London borough now. And I found another box load of his stuff in there. More photographs, postcards, letters, and more memoirs and other bits. So who knows what else off. In fact, in my parents' loft, I found an ice cream box with World War I era postcards that were also Ivan's. Not as interesting as a lot of the other stuff, but I just don't know what I'm going to find next. There was a lot of it. Now, here's a photo of Ivan, here in uniform when working for the Graves Registration Commission, attached to the British Red Cross in 1915. As I say, Ivan, it was from Sutton in South London, where he lived all his life. He's from a fairly well-to-do family, active in the Congregational Church, and Ivan's very active in the Boys Brigade, and he had a passion for photography, and he started working for Kodak in 1913. Now let's talk about how he ended up on the Western Front. Well, the mammoth task of registration, of graves registration, was started by Fabian Ware. Fabian Ware had been unable to enlist in the army in 1914 as he was just too old. But he did manage to gain control of a mobile ambulance unit provided by the British Red Cross Society. And he started off by helping to get wounded soldiers to Red Cross posts and hospitals. He soon realised that as the casualties were mounting up, there was no official procedure for registering and marking the graves of those who had been killed. And so he decided to start recording details of the graves so that the next of kin could be informed. And this saw the Graves Registration Commission brought into being in March 1915 on the Western Front. And it started as a Red Cross operation supplied by the army. But soon the commission was inundated with requests for information, photographs and details of the location of the graves. And therefore a photography section was initiated in May 1915. And since Ivan was working for Kodak at the time, he was clearly an obvious choice to recruit for this mobile unit, as experienced photographers were required. One of his colleagues, Roper, had also been recruited. So this new photography unit, they basically recruited 3 professional photographers who were to kind of go around the cemeteries to take photographs of requests as they came in. And this is the kind of area that Ivan was. This is that kind of shows the front line as it was in 1915. So Ivan goes out there in June 1915, literally within a week of being approached and interviewed. So there's the front line roughly as it was, just following the Second Battle of Ypres. The Ypres area here. And he moved into a place called Lillers, which I don't know if I've got marked on there. So it's down here. There's Lillers. So in France. And most of the area he would go to is kind of this area, kind of behind the lines in Ypres, and this kind of Pas-de-Calais Nord area. He would go down as far as Bethune, and during the Loos offensive in 1915, he was down in Vermelles and around here. But on the whole, he didn't go any further south than this area, at least during the war. He was mostly this kind of area. And he says that in France, at first, we travelled in an officer's car to various cemeteries, Bayeux, Bethune, Ypres, Kemmel, etc. But as more and more work came in, we went for several weeks and stayed at a graves registration section. There we had a number of these: Bayeux, Popperinge, Esther, Amiens, Arras, Dunkirk, Dickebusch. From those sections, we got a lift in a car when possible, but otherwise carried our equipment on our backs and rode a push bike. The more formal cemeteries were reached first by car and then on foot through communication trenches, etc. Quite an adventure and a certain amount of shelling as we worked close by some of our batteries. It was not always funny. He likes to understate things. He'll say it's not always funny. It was... Now, this is a photo of Ivan's colleagues at their makeshift darkroom and living space. They called it Kodak House. This is Roper here on the end, and that's a guy called Bert Haddon. And I forget this guy, Sergeant Comfort, I think his name is. Yes, and they've just found some ground sheets and made this darkroom in the grounds of the chateau in Lillers. And as we'll see, they had to do quite a lot of improvisation in their work. And Ivan says, in the early days before plots and rows of cemeteries were recorded, some time had to be spent in finding the names. When found, the name, number, regiment, etc. were carefully compared with the typewritten request to make sure that no mistake should be made. There was a great volume of work to do. By working 7 or 8 hours in a cemetery, as many as 100 or 120 photographs could be taken in a day. But this was only in such well-preserved cemeteries as had a plan of plots and rows. In advanced cemeteries where searching had to be done, 30 photographs would represent a good day's work. As we'll see, the various different types of cemeteries in differing states. Some were further behind the lines, of course, were in much better condition, much better ordered. The closer to the front line, then the more chaos you're going to encounter and difficult conditions. So here's a photo of, from Graves Registration Unit personnel at Ypres in the car. Interesting, there is a grave here, which I wasn't sure what they were doing with it. It's got the name of an Australian soldier on it, who, if you look them up, you'll find the name on the Menin Gate. This photo was probably taken in 1919 after the war because, as I'll explain, Ivan couldn't take any photo he liked during the actual conflict. So was it a grave that they removed because it was wrongly named? I don't know. So here's a typical cemetery that Ivan might have gone to, well, he did go to, Popperinga Old Military Cemetery, not far from here. Many of you may have been there. This has got what I would call standard GRU crosses. They're kind of tarred in this black dark colour, which helps them weather a bit better. They've got these kind of zinc metal strips, and they should have kind of GRU also tagged on the top. And if they've got that kind of cross, that means they've been properly registered, and it's fairly standard. But as we'll see, a lot of the cemeteries, well, many cemeteries had crosses in all shapes and sizes. Here's a grave marker of Major Montgomery of the Grenadier Guards. This is Vermelles British Cemetery. He was killed in action on the 21st of October 1915. And here's the grave in situ. This is in Vermelles. You can see some shell-fired, shell-damaged buildings in the background. Now, some of these crosses you'll find hanging up in churches, and this is the same cross here. In a church in Norfolk. So I saw that and I thought, wow, okay, I have a photo of it taken by Ivan. It's a ceremony at Bayeux Cemetery on All Saints' Day. Again, you can see these are kind of typical crosses here, but then you've got ones like this, which is much bigger. This cross, again, is not the cross of this casualty, whose name I can't quite read it on there. But he has a cross that looks more like a standard GRU cross, like one of these, meaning this one has got lost, i.e. probably destroyed by shell fire and then had to be replaced with yet another cross. Now you'll see I like to do a bit of then and now. This is the same photo, but I've melded it with what the cemetery looks like today. That's the same casualty there. So you can see the Portland limestone against the wooden crosses. Now onto photography. So Ivan was given a folding pocket Kodak number 3A, which is this. This is one of his cameras. He would have probably got through more than one or two, so I know he lost one. And there were times when he had to leave cemeteries quite quickly because of shelling, but this is the camera I have that survives. It's in very good condition. I would take it apart, but I need 3 or 4 hands to do that because I'm holding a microphone. But yeah, it holds 1:2:2 film, which takes 10 exposures. Shutter still works, I can click that. And he'd use that with a wooden tripod, which you can see in the picture there, which I also have, which folds. And then you've got the VPK, the vest pocket Kodak. He had a couple of those as well, which those are very small. They're no bigger than a smartphone, really. But I don't know if he used those very much. But his main camera for the work he did was one of these. And you could attach a glass plate adapter to that. But he would only have done that when he was doing photography for himself. And out in the field, that would be impractical. So the use of roll film was very necessary to be able to get as many photos as possible. As I say, he said he took as many as 120 photos. And I think the most he did in a day was 150. So that's 15 roll films. I mean, there's no way you could do that with glass plates. Well, you'd need like a van load of them. And Ivan's, he states that all the films were supplied in tropical packing, i.e. in sealed tins. And he says this was a very wise precaution, as the films were often lying about for some time before development, and they were safe from the damp. On one occasion, I, complete with bicycle, camera and films, fell into a large shell hole full of water, but crawled out safely with all the apparatus intact, and thanks to the tins, all the films undamaged. And then there was the need for improvisation. particularly in relation to the water supply. There's the glass plate negative that I showed, that I've got there. That's what it looks like, of Lissenhoek Military Cemetery. So here's some pictures of improvisation. The water supply was a big issue. Having to wash the films and finding running water was often difficult. Sometimes they had to use a stream or river that was going past. Sometimes that was when there was snow and ice and things were freezing over. Ivan says, work in advanced cemeteries was often very difficult, especially in the winter. The photographer stuck in the mud and got his tripod covered with it. He had to wade through pools of water, and the graves were often in a very rough condition and had to be tended to in order to make them at all presentable for a photograph. On more than one occasion, I pulled up lumps of turf and spread them over unsightly pools or holes, which would spoil the picture. Graves and crosses were often badly damaged by shell fire and rendered unfit to photograph. On one occasion, visiting a small advanced cemetery at Messines, nothing remained of the grave but a large shell hole. An hour's journey through communication trenches for nothing. And he goes on, well, I'll just talk about the photos here. So that's Ivan there, and Haddon stood up here, trying to wash films in the kind of icy cold at a place called Arc. In the snow, and then that was probably, that's around 1915 that photo was taken. Winter 1915, 1916. This one's after the war, after the armistice, because you wouldn't want to be doing that before the armistice. This is on the moat in Ypres. There must have been a fair few shells landing in this moat. Anyway, lack of adequate darkroom facilities would often force Ivan and his colleagues to use improvised means to carry out their photographic work. And in this picture, a homemade raft is being used to tow films and prints on a wooden frame in order to wash them. So they had to go to a lot of kind of interesting measures and improvisation to get the work done. And you get the sense from Ivan that there was a lot of dedication to try and get the work done to the best quality possible under difficult circumstances. And he says, operating itself when wearing a tin helmet and gas mask in the alert position was far from easy. The gas mask had a nasty habit of pushing into the camera at the moment of exposure. Another great difficulty in operating was the position of the sun. Photographs had to be taken of graves which faced many different directions, and not infrequently the lens had to face the sun and be shielded in some way with notebook from the direct glare. Combine these conditions already described and add a slippery, waterlogged cemetery with a bit of hostile shelling going on in the neighbourhood, and it will be seen that the photographer's lot was not always a happy one. In spite of these difficulties, however, the percentage of failures was very small, not more than 1 or 2% at the most. Now, there were restrictions on photography. This was heavily monitored by 1915. Unauthorised photography could potentially be punished by court-martial. This was particularly precipitated by the Christmas truce of 1914. A lot of photographs ended up in the British press of Tommy and Fritz fraternising, and the top brass did not like this. So there was a big clampdown on photography, and obviously there was the fear of spies falling into German spies' hands if they get hold of photographs, or even worse, the British press might get hold of the photographs. This is an example of a authority pass. So Ivan needed authority passes to go to certain places if they were in sensitive areas or in what you might call a military area. He couldn't just go there without a pass. And in fact, to not have the pass was risky. He says, things got more and more lively as time went on. About the quietest sector was Armentières, and here a man called Sergeant Callow took me to some of the very advanced cemeteries close to the front line. And on one occasion, I went with an officer called Captain Fraser to a cemetery reached by a communication trench, and we were arrested because I was carrying a camera. We were marched back under escort by armed men in the HQ, where after exhibiting our credentials, we were at liberty again. Now, the cemeteries let's talk a bit more about the cemeteries. The state of the battlefields and cemeteries came as quite a shock to Sir Edwin Lutyens. He was one of the distinguished architects who designed many of the cemeteries after the war. And when he visited the Western Front in 1917, he got to see the challenge that lay ahead with his own eyes. And he describes them thus. He says, "The cemeteries, the dotted graves, are pathetic, especially when one thinks how things are run and problems treated at home. What humanity can endure, suffer, is beyond belief. The battlefields, the obliteration of all human endeavour, achievement and the human achievement of destruction, is bettered by poppies and wild flowers that are as friendly to an unexploded shell as they are to the leg of a garden seat in Surrey. The graveyards, haphazard from the needs of much to do and little time for thought, and then a ribbon of isolated graves like a Milky Way across miles of country, where men were tucked in where they fell. Ribbons of little crosses, each touching each across a cemetery, set in a wilderness of annuals. And where one sort of flower has grown, the effect is charming, easy and oh so pathetic, that one thinks no other monument is needed. For miles these graves occur, from single graves to close-packed areas of thousands, on every sort of site and in every sort of position, the bodies laid to face the enemy. In some places so close, one wonders how to arrange their names in decent order." Now, there are various different types of cemeteries. So some were what you might call medical cemeteries. These were based near hospitals or casualty clearing stations. This is a kind of then and now blend of Wimereux communal cemetery. More accurately, it would be I suppose this is an extension. Fits into the bracket of an extension of a communal cemetery, which is attached to a hospital, or where you can see the graves are, for the most part, marked just by numbers. Yeah, and so a lot of cemeteries were, they used spaces in communal cemeteries. This is Esther Communal Cemetery, an extension. So when there wasn't enough room in the communal cemetery, they might have to build an extension part. And the most high-ranking grave I could find that Ivan took a photograph is of Brigadier General John Gough, VC, at Esther. This is the grave here. So it's kind of surrounded by this kind of fence. But as you'll see, it's not necessarily the most ostentatious grave. I mean, there's this one that's enormous. And so different graves come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, according to whoever was a loved one of that person and decided what kind of cross they wanted to give them. And that didn't necessarily have much to do with the rank of the soldier necessarily. Sometimes it would. A much loved officer might be more likely to get a more fancy cross, but not necessarily. But you can see, yeah, lots of different shapes of crosses. And then moving a bit closer into the front line, you've got Lissenhoek Military Cemetery, which is again down the road near Popperinge. This again is a blended image using the photo from that glass plate negative mixed with my photograph there. And this was attached to a casualty clearing station called Remy Siding. And then moving further in, you get to what are more likely known as battlefield or advanced cemeteries. So this is a kind of Vlamertinge, and now you can see kind of there's visible damage. Shell fire is really destroying buildings around there. And places like this may have had, I think, Vlamertinge, I think in this building there was an advanced dressing station at one point. These cemeteries would often have ADS, or regimental aid posts. Now there were isolated graves, so Ivan would discover graves in random places. Graves could be just anywhere, because soldiers were buried in a hurry, often where they fell, so not in a set cemetery. These are isolated graves near Messines. You can make out the grave of Rifleman Arthur Egbert Gerard of the King's Royal Rifle Corps. And the other type of cemetery were concentration cemeteries, which I'll mention a bit later. They were kind of after the war. after the war had finished. So how dangerous was the work that Ivan had to do? So these are more examples of kind of advanced cemeteries. Here we've got Bedford House Cemetery and railway dugouts, which are not very far away from here. They're kind of southeast side of Ypres. And you can see shell holes, you can see damaged crosses. In fact, this is an Australian soldier, gunner Francis Provis. You can see that the original cross actually is this one here. That also says Provis on it. If you look in, you might not be able to see it from where you are, but zooming in, that says Provis on it. So this is a man who was killed by shell fire, and then his grave was blown up by shell fire, and left a huge shell hole, which you can see there. So sometimes part of the job of the GRU was to replace crosses, and here they put a brand new one, which looks nice, but of course it's got this lake behind it, created by a shell. I think that's an Australian Imperial Force cap badge attached to the top of it. This one is Canadian field artillery, and yeah, you can see a shell hole behind it and a cross fallen over. This one is an example. Also, you can see there's a code here. It says D12008. Now, Ivan would put a number on all the photos he had. The D indicates his number, so each photographer had their own number, A, B, C, D, etc. So he was D, and this is his photograph number 12,008. By the end of the war, he reached, I think, somewhere around, I think he said, it's about 28,000. That's where he got to. And this is the grave marker of Frederick Gosling from the Hampshire Regiment. He was killed in action on the 1st of November 1914, so very early in the war. This is kind of first Battle of Ypres. In Hyde Park Corner Cemetery, opposite the Plug Street Memorial. But if you look up this casualty on the Commonwealth War Graves website, you will find his name on the memorial to the missing, the Plugsteer Memorial, which is opposite. In other words, this grave was blown to bits. Of course, it's had 4 years of hostilities for that to happen. Ivan probably took this photo in 1915, could be 1916, but at some point it's been lost. Now, while Ivan was not fighting in the front line, it is clear that he was often in close proximity to it. He makes numerous references in his diaries and letters to the din of the guns and frequent hazards of enemy shell fire. Often he had to dodge shrapnel and change routes, and on one occasion his camera stand got hit. And he writes, naturally the photographers met with various adventures. On one occasion, on a bright clear day, my tripod and camera must have been observed by an aeroplane or balloon. Fritz opened out with some whiz-bangs and fairly pasted the neighbourhood of this cemetery, fortunately without hitting either the graves or the photographer. And again later in the same day, objection was taken to the view of the photographer's apparatus, and I, together with the officer and orderly, were chased out of a wood and followed some distance up the road with shell fire. The officer was bowled over once, but got up again with only a slight scratch on his neck. The photographer was not popular in cemeteries near battery positions, for this reason that he was liable to draw fire on clear days. And he says, on one day in a cemetery at Wormerzeele, I was taking a picture just in front of a naval 6-inch gun, and was so busy I did not realise they were going to fire. And as they fired, I and the camera bounced in the air. If shelling got too heavy, the officer would withdraw us. Then he says, another time at Dickebusch, I and the officer stood talking at his dugout entrance. He said quite casually, I think it would be a good idea to move from here, as Jerry has his balloons up and may think we would be a suitable target. We just started to move off when we heard the thud of one of his long-range guns and the whiz of a shell approaching. We threw ourselves down and got a shower of earth and things all over us, but nobody was hurt. Where we had been standing at the dugout entrance was a big shell hole. It made us think, that did. Again, he likes to understate things. Some of the cemeteries around Ypres were pretty lively, such as railway dugouts and Spoil Bank near Hill 60 and Essex Farm in Boosinger. This is Essex Farm Military Cemetery here, with the canal bank going along there, and you can see the state of the trees. And there's quite a lot of debris and all sorts along here. And Ivan says, well, I had a special photo request for that cemetery one day, and the officer I was with said it was too lively for photography. However, not wishing to fail, I went by myself and took the photo. I rather think that this incident and others like it resulted in me being mentioned in dispatches. I'll give you some examples from his 1917 diary of going through Ypres, in fact. So this is March the 11th. Today's what, March the 8th, isn't it? 7th. So, yeah. This is 1917. Go to Ypres prison and then walk through Cathedral and Menin Gate to Poitiers. Is that pronounced correctly? Poitiers. Poitiers. See air fight and 2 British machines brought down. Aviator falls separate. Work in large cemetery, kitchen garden and chateau lawn. Those will refer to other cemeteries and parts of the cemeteries. Then walk back and take odd grave in fields to left of road, i.e. an isolated grave that he just happened to come across. Plenty of shrapnel all the way back. A bit glances off Corporal Rise back. Work in prison and return to Bayeux. Go to service at YMCA in evening. A few days later he says, go to Ypres prison and walk to La Brique. Dodge lyddite, which is an explosive, at the ramparts. From La Brique, walk to St. Jean White House, take 80 exposures. Plenty of German shelling near prison. Make a detour to get back safely and return via Sailly Port. Make a dash out of prison. During interval, Corporal Rise returns with file. Clerical work in afternoon, chess, etc. in the evening. Go to Essex Farm and work, this is a few days later, go to Essex Farm and work on Bard Cottage. Marengo and Essex Cemetery, take 64. Return with Corporal Poole to car. Plenty of big shells on battery to left of road all morning. Bit catches camera stand and dents on way back. So that shows that his equipment was getting hit by shrapnel. 24th, it goes, fine day, go in boxcar to Cité Bonjean via Laventie and Fleur Bay. Road shelled. Try alternative and that also shelled. Go by third route, okay. Take 130 in Cité Bonjean. So he has to keep changing his route. On the 30th he goes to Bedford House and he says, everything torn up by bombardment. Take 15 photos and return with men and kits. And I like this bit. He says, I have to go via Shrapnel Corner on account of severe shelling. So things are pretty bad if you have to go via Shrapnel Corner to get away from severe shelling. But then the afternoon was in the office and he went to the pictures in the evening. In August he goes to a place in Vormezil called Shelley Farm. I don't know if it's called Shelley Farm because it gets shelled a lot, but the next phrase he wrote is, get shelled out. Walk to Damstrasse and Pheasant Wood and explore Ravine Wood. Get shelled out and Mr. Day got slightly wounded. Make off for Vormezil, leave camera stand behind. So he had to leave his tripod basically where it was. It's just, there was too much going on. Car to Ypres, strafe on, work in Menin Road South Cemetery, but soon have to come away on account of shrapnel. Take odd grave in Vlamertinge, go to Mendingham in afternoon, see aeroplane brought down at night. Oh, and I should mention, on June the 7th, which was the Great Messines Battle of 1917, he says, 3:10 a.m. get shaken all over the place by the mines exploding. Then terrific bombardment for an hour. See SOS signals and very lights. Wounded passing down street all the morning. Rue de Lille shelled. In afternoon go back to HQ via Merville and Bethune. Here is the prison cemetery, or that was later renamed Ypres Reservoir Cemetery. You can see graves here. He's taking the photograph from within the prison grounds, through the wall, which has been rebuilt, and you can see it's still a prison today. And if you go to Ypres Reservoir, and you can see this wall. Obviously, can no longer get a photo like this. But yeah, it's an amazing photo. You've got the reservoir is actually here. I think they renamed it because who wants to visit their loved one at a place called Prison Cemetery? It has too many connotations of were they shot at dawn or something like that. In September, Ivan writes, car to Cruise Strata, and walk to Lille Gate, too lively to reach men in road, walk across to railway dugouts, have to come away in a hurry, return via Shrapnel Corner and Vlamertinge, Ford car gets bombed in afternoon, sleep in cellar. Oh, there's the prison, kind of then and now. Now, Ivan was in there in 1918 when the Germans were advancing. And he says, in 1918, the last year of the war, this became very noisy as the Germans tried to advance in many places. Our leave was stopped. Our work was extra difficult and sometimes very dangerous. While living in a hut in Lissenhoek Cemetery, Popperinge, the Germans began to advance on the Ypres sector and captured Kemmel and Bayeux. In one day, what had been a casualty clearing station with nurses, an operating theatre, X-ray department, etc., became an advanced dressing station with walking wounded pouring in. We could see the guns firing on the hills around Loca. I was commanded to dig a grave for 20 men. Then I moved on to Popperinge and lived in a cellar for 2 days while it was being shelled. Then I moved up to Ypres prison, where the dressing station was being shelled by armour-piercing shells. All too busy to be comfortable. Then all personnel like us were withdrawn further away from the line, and I then lived on the farm at Eskelbeck and moved to as many cemeteries as I could reach on the push bike. Now, why was this job important? Now, never before had so much attention been given to the needs of bereaved relatives of war dead. It's not known exactly who originated this idea, says Ivan, but it was a thought which gave much consolation and comfort to many thousands of bereaved relatives. It was one of those little things which made such a difference to many who had lost all that mattered in their world. That's how Ivan sums it up. And kind of my thoughts, Ivan's job was to facilitate a way for families to grieve their loved ones who had lost their lives in the line of duty. And the First World War saw unprecedented casualties from an army that had been massively increased by volunteers from the civilian population and by conscripts from January 1916 onwards. In previous wars, it was normal to bury dead soldiers in mass graves, and only soldiers of higher rank could expect to have their own personal grave and memorial. So in the First World War, it was decided that each soldier, regardless of rank, should be given an individual burial with a personal headstone, at least for the British and Commonwealth soldier, that is. Being able to visit the grave of the deceased, as well as holding a funeral, are normal parts of how we grieve the loss of someone close. During the war, this just wasn't possible for relatives back home, as the dead were buried close to where they fell. Some cemeteries under British control found themselves under German control as the front line shifted. And unfortunately, many men were reported missing in action and were never found, and could only have their names added to the long lists which we can now see on memorials, such as Thiep Val, and of course, which is on the Somme, and then the men in Gates just a few yards from here. So Ivan's work was to provide something tangible to the family of the dead soldier, of what remained of their loved one, a window they could not otherwise have had, at least not until well after the war finished. And he would end up photographing graves of people he knew. So this is Sergeant Harry Daniels of the Royal Engineers, buried in the London Rifle Brigade Cemetery near Plug Street, as the British would call it. He was killed by a machine gun that opened up on a night work party. And he was a lieutenant in the Sutton Congregational Boys Brigade, so Ivan would have known him pretty well. This is Major Hugh Murray Forster of the King's Own Scottish Borderers. So he's got a standard cross there, but then this thing made out of stone has been added. He died of wounds on the 26th of September 1915 at the Battle of Loos. He lived in Sutton, so I don't know if Ivan knew him, but perhaps knew of his family. And then we have cousin Jack. He was probably the closest person to Ivan that died. Now Jack was killed on the northernmost part of the Somme sector, in a place near Gommecourt. And this is an example of what was sent home to the relatives. So if you asked for a photo of a war grave, it would be put together into this card. The Director General of Graves Registration Inquiries give the name, rank, regiment, and the position of the grave and the railway station of where to go. So that's a good example of what was given to the relatives. Now I said at first, Ivan, when he was going to the cemeteries, he would be looking for the specific requests that had come in. But more and more requests came in, and it just wasn't practical to go hunting around. I mean, it can be hard enough for any of us going to a cemetery today. I mean, you can look it up in the cemetery register, and if it's a large cemetery, it can still take a bit of wandering around. But imagine you've got to do that with dozens of people in a cemetery that's big. It's going to take a long time. So actually what they started to do was photograph everything. They photographed all the graves, so that if a request came up, they could then go to their register, their file, and see if they had a copy already taken. So take a photograph, usually of like 4 graves at once, so that you could then print it out and then cut the photograph up to get the picture of the war grave itself. So here's Captain Edmund Lilly, known as Jack, St Armand's British Cemetery, southwest of Arras. I actually have his dog tag. It fell out of one of the diaries I have. It was on display in the exhibition here, but for second lieutenant, in the Bedfordshire Regiment, although he became an acting captain. So I think it says captain on his. Yes, it does. Captain on his grave. Now, his cousin Viola, so Viola Bawtree was Ivan's sister. There she is. This is Viola, my great-great-aunt, in 1917 with her dog. She was distraught when she heard of Jack's death. She was very close, had a strong affection for Jack, to put it mildly. And she writes, on August the 4th, the anniversary of the war and a day of intercession, I returned from the Downs with Lorna, the dog. Before breakfast, I had picked some harebells. Father came out to the back door and called me, and wonderingly I answered him. He said nervously, Viola, there's very bad news from Jack. As he paused, I said, yes. Thinking if the news came from Jack, he was just wounded or ill. Father continued, as you might have expected, he's been killed, leading a trench mortar battery. In an indifferent sort of voice, as if listening to uninteresting news, I said, oh. And Father added the remark that Aunt Millie, that's Jack's mother, was upstairs in hysterics. And then he went back to the dining room. Mechanically, I put the harebells in water, fetched my breakfast in, pushed it down somehow in a sort of feverish haste to get away, and then went on with my normal duties. All through the morning I carried on with work in the same stunned sort of way, not allowing myself to think, and perfectly dry-eyed. As I was peeling potatoes, Aunt Polly came up to me and whimperingly said something about, isn't it awful about poor Jack? And some other words about me always being good to him. I answered in the same indifferent tone. I forget if she kissed me. Sylvia and Father went to church. I went and picked all the violas, a job I'd been meaning to do for some days. And as I carried a bowl full into the breakfast room, Mother came down and followed me in and kissed me without saying a word. That was better and made my eyes just moisten. She also went to church. Later, Aunt Millie came out into the kitchen with her cup and saucer, her face swollen with crying. I was grinding salt for the salt cellar. She cried sobbingly to me, "Oh, Viola, what are we going to do?" I quickly left the salt, put my arm around her neck and kissed her again and again, but said no word. She went away weeping, and just for a moment, my own tears fell. I've often read that out at Remembrance Day services, and usually when I do, it kind of has quite an impact on me. It gives a real sense of how it would have felt in so many homes across, well, I was going to say the UK, but it'd be true in France, it'd be true in Germany, it'd be true in Turkey, Russia, lots of places where so many men, so many people lost their lives. Now, by 1916, Ivan was drafted into the Royal Engineers, and shortly after, the Graves Registration Commission had become a fully fledged part of the army, and it was renamed the Directorate of Graves Registration and Inquiries, because before that it was basically run and financed by the Red Cross, but now it had a bit more of a stronger footing being part of the army, and that was why Ivan then got put into the Royal Engineers, which I think was being a photographer. I was trying to work out why the Royal Engineers, but that is part of what they do. So here you can see in his RE uniform this portrait probably taken in 1916. The officers of the Graves Registration Commission had held honorary ranks, but now they were given commissions and in many cases promoted. So Fabian Ware was promoted from Major to Lieutenant Colonel and then to Brigadier General in August 1916. And Ivan, as I said, is in the Royal Engineer with the rank of Sapper. In May 1917, the Imperial War Graves Commission was established by Royal Charter, with the Prince of Wales as President and Fabian Ware at the helm. Now, this is the only photo I have of Fabian Ware taken by Ivan, but he was asked to take this photo at a place called Château de la Tour. Some of the most important figures who helped forge the Imperial War Graves Commission. Ware is stood there in the middle. And then you've got Sir George Purley from Canada, Admiral Sir Edmund Poe, I think is that chap who's not looking at the camera. Sir Thomas Mackenzie from New Zealand. Château de la Tour was a key, after the war, was where the Commission had a major HQ. As the war progressed, Ivan's job got a lot busier with more and more requests coming in. He got photo requests of individual graves from cemeteries all around the Pas-de-Calais and West Flanders regions. He would get involved in assisting the upkeep of cemeteries. He'd be involved in making wooden crosses, sometimes digging graves even. A lot of clerical work, like registering graves of fallen soldiers, of course, and as mentioned in 1918, he even assisted in a casualty clearing station, helping with the X-ray machine. And this report of the DGRE from June 1918 says that from that date, which refers to May 1915, until May 1918, 85,000 requests for photographs have been noted in the department, and 51,300 negatives have been received from France. But those 50,000 negatives, that could constitute 200,000 graves if he was taking 4 per negative. It may safely be stated that no portion of the work of the Directorate has given greater comfort and satisfaction to the general public than the provision of these photographs. And although the photographs have been supplied by the Army, the whole cost of the cameras, films, paper, chemicals and printing and developing apparatus, together with part of the expenses of transport, has been defrayed by the Joint War Committee of the British Red Cross Society. And so now the last part of this talk is just kind of what happened after the armistice. Kind of, as I said, Ivan's work got busier as the war progressed, and when the armistice happened, he still had plenty of work to do. There was still plenty of requests going on. And of course, he had more accessibility to go wherever he wanted to go. Places he couldn't get to, he now could. Although, as this photo shows, that there were difficulties accessing certain places. Ivan says, when the armistice came, the photographic work was still further increased as cemeteries became more accessible and many graves hitherto in bad condition were put to rights and made fit for photography. So this photo, this is driver Griffiths. Ivan got given this bike in December 1918. At first he was annoyed that he came with a chauffeur. He said he'll get in the way. I think he was quite glad of him when he went out on this trip, which is a place called Wiltshire. Yeah. Heading east out into the Ypres Salient with very muddy water. Now this is extremely muddy water. I posted this on social media and people were saying, why are there no ripples? There should be ripples. Are they questioning my photo? It's not AI. What's going on here? Well, there aren't ripples because the water is so thick. It's basically mud. It's super thick. If it was just a big puddle, you'd probably see some ripples. Yes, a sign there for Passchendaele, I think. And here's a photo of Ivan at the ruins of Moorsleder, which are close to Passchendaele. So, yeah. And at this point, he could take photographs of whatever he liked. Because before, he just couldn't. So as soon as he got the opportunity, he went and got as many films as possible and went around Ypres and other places just photographing. Did exactly what I would have done. Took as many photos as he could of all sorts of things. And quite a few selfies as well, kind of in front of ruined buildings and wrecked tanks. That is Passchendaele. As usual, the biggest pile of rubble is probably the church, which is there, but there's nothing left of it. Chateau Wood in Hooge, or Hoog, Hoog, or huge. The British we like to say huge crater cemetery, don't we? Hoog. Yeah, Chateau Wood. You can see kind of duck boards there and the wood there, and then is that where the fairground is? Bello, not quite. The other side, is it? Other side. Okay. But yeah, this photo just shows the kind of level of destruction. Ruins of Kemmel Church to the south of Ypres. This is actually under snow. There's the Kemmelberg there. Yeah, that's the best preserved building in Kemmel, pretty much in that area. Just obliterated. Now here's the tank selfie. Wrecked British Mark IV tank D32, known as the Doctor. This was knocked out of action on the 9th of October 1917 on the Polkapelle Road near Ypres. This photo would have been taken in 1920. You can see Ivan's actually in civvy clothes when he went, and I'll explain why he was there in 1920. Yeah, wreckage of a British plane, Sanctuary Wood, near Ypres. The graves of the pilot and navigator are visible behind the plane to the right. You can see them there. Apparently they had to be buried at night because this whole area would have been under fire in the daytime. This is just a shell-holed wasteland around Hill 60 looking towards Ypres. You can see the Zillebeck Lake here. Now, before the war, this would have been just flat, right?
No, yeah.
So, kind of?
It was a hill.
There was a, yeah, okay.
But they flattened the hill.
It's just, yeah. It's rather more undulating, I think, than just, And then here's a mine crater on Hill 60. Probably, I think this is the Caterpillar crater. I couldn't be sure, but that was the one I thought made most sense in this description. It just says mine crater on Hill 60 as Ivan's caption. And then you've got the Spanbroek Molen crater, which was created by an explosive charge of 91,000 pounds of ammonal. And that's the largest of the mine craters from the Battle of Messines that was set off on the 7th of June 1917, now known as the Pool of Peace. Yeah, this again is under snow. You can make out, I think there's someone just there on the other side. Here's a then and now photo of Ivan outside the Cloth Hall, merged with my photo taken in 2013. Now, this photo was only supposed to be of these refugees here. So these guys here with their dog carts, these are guys returning to Ypres. And Ivan was hoping to get, he writes to his sister saying, he sent a copy of this photo to his sister Viola and said, I was hoping just to get a photo of the refugees with the dog carts. But the Tommies would get in the photo. He's been photobombed by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Tommies. They're not supposed to be in this photograph. But Ivan would attract attention walking around with his camera. People wanted photographs, and he would get people pay him. So a lot of photos in his collection are of smiling Tommies. Some of them are like next to an unexploded shell. Kind of look at me. Hopefully I've got one of those in this. Here's the Cathedral and Cloth Hall in ruins. I don't need to tell you that. Yeah, remarkable that we are here. Where was Ivan stood when he took this photo?
Sorry? St. George's Memorial.
What's here? St. George? Yeah. Yes. Yes. Well, I like to ask the question, why can't I take a photo like this now? Because there's this church in the way. Yeah. Blocking the view. Yeah. And there's kind of then and now of St. Martin's Cathedral. Now here's President Woodrow Wilson, who appeared in Ypres in June 1919. He'd been, of course, in Paris for the Paris Peace Conference. And as soon as he comes into Ypres, Ivan's right there with his camera. Of course, the Tommies are all noticing the camera and smiling as well. You can see them there. But there's Woodrow Wilson chatting away with the mayor of Ypres and King Albert.
King Albert is
over there.
Which one's King Albert?
Left.
That one?
Left. No, left. No, in the background.
Oh, he's,
Tallest guy. Yeah. That's the.
oh, he's over there.
No, to the left.
Oh, him.
That's King Albert.
That's King Albert. Ah, right, okay.
And the second one from the left with the beard. Yeah.
You do it, yeah.
This person, that's Jules Comans, who was the town architect responsible for the reconstruction of Ypres.
Really? Okay. Ah, amazing. Right. See, Ivan didn't caption that. He probably didn't know.
Add to your knowledge.
Yeah. So here's some Graves Registration Unit personnel in Ypres. So yeah, he took a lot of photos like this of, and then people are looking more relaxed because this is after the war. And then, yeah, a few years back when I came to Ypres, I did another blend here, looking along the Rue de Lille, the Reichelstraat, looking up towards the post office. What was the post office, which was probably, arguably the best preserved building still standing in 1919. And then here's Ivan. That's Ivan in the sidecar there, and driver Griffiths there at the little gate. With a sign today for Rampart Cemetery, which is over here. And then we've got the Menin Gate, which was just a gap in the ramparts then. And then I've superimposed the Menin Gate today as it looked there, and I've put the cyclists in colour. but everything else is in sepia. There's a few signs in colour there as well, but yeah, that's you can still see the trench railway here. Yeah, there's a bit closer in. And then, yeah, Ivan got to photograph kind of New Ypres. Here's some Belgian ingenuity, turning a load of elephant iron and other kind of bits of dugouts into an estaminet where you can go and get a pint of stout. Fantastic. And then all the prefab housing that appeared on the, what was called the Plan d'Amour, or the Min Plan? Miniplan, yep. And Ivan finally got to relax a bit. Here he is in Boulogne with Haddon. Yeah, having a drink in Boulogne. Now Ivan says the photographic section came to an end in 1920, and arrangements were made for relatives to deal with local French photographers if they required a grave photograph. He says the work throughout was carried on with the idea of providing the best possible photograph, and no pains were spared to keep the work going, however difficult the conditions might be. And he was asked to go back in 1920. And this is a note from Fabian Ware, which says, "It is hoped that all officers of the DGR&E and all connected with the IWGC will give every assistance to Mr. Bawtree, who has only been lent for a short time to the War Office and commissioned to carry out this work. The provision of photographs illustrating all sides of the work, taken by someone who has real experience of it, is at the moment of the most importance, but has to be completed in the shortest time possible." So in 1920, they were trying to get the cemeteries into good order, get the Portland limestone to replace the wooden crosses. There was a lot of pressure to do this. Not everyone was happy with how the war dead were being treated. Many people wanted their loved ones returned home. They wanted to repatriate them, bury them the way they wanted to. How dare the army take my son in life and then keep him in death as well? So there was an urgency to try and quell the anxiety of the public, to show what was being done, and Ivan was part of that. He went to document what was going on the Western Front, and yeah, around. So he went to the Ypres area. He also went down to Arras and the Somme, where he took photographs of kind of to show what was going on. He got driven around in this fancy car, Vauxhall car with it's got the IWGC crest on the side of it. There he is. There, don't know where this is, but. And one of the things he documented was clearing the cemeteries. And these photos are quite unique. So this is April 1920, and he goes to the Passchendaele battlefields and records a Labour company combing the battlefield. So this guy here is spotted there's a helmet there. So he's found some remains. Then they dig them up. Nasty, nasty job, this awful digging up bits. The bodies are coming apart when you're pulling them bits out with your hands. Must have been pretty smelly. They're recording where. And they're finding all sorts of things that they can find to identify the casualties. I put this tin here because this belongs to a friend of mine that was helped to identify his great-grandfather who was killed in Passchendaele area. And he was considered missing for a number of years until a body was found, I think, around 1920-21. And he was identified by this cigarette case, which has his initials on it, which are EFCC. Yeah, you may not be able to make that out on there. But yeah, you can see this is damaged by shell fire. There are bits of his uniform stuck, imprinted onto this, like burned onto the case. So that kind of thing would help identify. But you only had I think it was a 20% chance of identifying a soldier. Here, if we zoom in on this one, these are kind of some of the artifacts found with a a soldier that was being exhumed. Zoom in a bit. You can make out Australia written here and here on these shoulder tags, and that looks like an AIF cap badge. So you at least know this is an Australian soldier, but you might not know any more than that. And then these are removed to the concentration cemeteries. So the last kind of cemetery that came into being after the armistice was the concentration cemetery. And the most famous of those is Tyne-Cot. Some of these cemeteries would have started off small, but then they were massively expanded from smaller cemeteries, isolated graves that were moved and removed to these bigger cemeteries. It's at last burial service. This is Passchendaele New Concentration Cemetery. And yeah, where's that then? Tyne-Cot, yeah. You can see they put the cross of sacrifice on top of this, what is a German bunker. So Ivan's photo, you can see the German bunker. And I've added in, yeah, kind of the bits of what it looks like now. And then, yeah, clearing up shells from places like Hugues Crater Cemetery. There was so much to do after the war, and Ivan was there to document these things. And this is Louvencourt Cemetery on the Somme. This is what they were aiming for, to make the cemeteries. This is one of the first completed cemeteries. There were kind of 3 cemeteries, experimental cemeteries, completed in 1920. Yeah, and Ivan even shows some of the finishing and shaping of headstones, engraving a headstone for a Canadian soldier. And here is Ivan in the 1950s, with some of his photographic gear that he used during the war. So this is the wooden tripod that I have, and one of his cameras. Although that camera there doesn't actually look like the one I've got, so I don't know what happened to that one. But and that's him. This is an advert he made of him in his cellar, developing photos. So he was offering a service. So this was probably in his retirement. He continued working for Kodak until he retired in 1954. But he would offer photographic services. Just to remind you that I am still at your service for anything photographic. Work sent by return of post, moderate charges. Yeah. And finally, that's me with Ivan and my toy owl and my mother in May 1978. So my life overlapped with Ivan's only by a couple of years. He died the next year. But yeah. And that all led me to produce this book. And that's that.
Okay, for Q&A?
Yeah.
Well, before we start questions, I just, as a local historian, as an Ypres historian, I would like to pay homage to him, because there are many photographs that I saw passing that I never realized that he took. I mean, he is probably the only professional photographer apart from the local Antonies, but he was there earlier in 1919, so he has recorded some views that otherwise we would never have had.
Yeah.
I mean, like the photograph where you saw taken from Reservoir Cemetery, where you see the temporary huts, the Kent-Ieper houses, and then the ruins on the background. It's such a telling photograph, and I've been using it for 25 years without actually realizing that was one of Ivan Bawtree's photographs, just like the photographs taken from Woodrow Wilson visiting Ypres. I didn't know that they were Ivan's. So it's really...
he doesn't always get credited properly.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
He should have given it to the Imperial War Museum then.
Yeah, well, better that than the tip, I guess.
Yeah.
The bin man might have pulled it out.
But what happened with because there were what the family had was just a tip of the iceberg of all the photographs that were taken. So what happened to all the other photographs?
Yeah, so we've got, 600 glass plates. I found loads of other prints as well. So in terms of total number of photos, that if I was to get all the photos that I have that I could possibly find that he's taken, we might have something in the region of 700, maybe 800 photos. But he took, I think it was 28,600 of war graves. That doesn't include the ones he took running around Ypres taking. So he probably took, let's say he took 30,000 photos probably in the course of 5 years, 1915 to 1920. Yeah. So where did they go? Well, you might well ask. I always get asked this question: where are all these photos? Surely the Commonwealth War Graves Commission has them. You ask them, and they give me a blank stare. They don't really know. Now, Ivan actually, I've got a letter written by Fabian Ware to Ivan from 1941, thanking him for coming in to help make order to their stores, the photographic stores. Ivan had obviously gone in to help with a bit of admin work to kind of, but I don't know what's happened to those stores. A lot of stuff was lost during the Second World War. I don't think we can blame the Luftwaffe for that. Sometimes we can, but I don't think in this case. The guy at the War Graves Commission said, well, there's a lot of paperwork that was just poles, or they needed to recycle paper, what have you, but we don't really know. Obviously, a lot of people who received war grave photos, there might be individual families, have the cards that I showed you of Cousin Jack. Plenty of people have shown me that they have those, or sometimes people find them on eBay or even in an antique shop or something. But yeah, the bulk of these photos
Vanished.
Who knows? Yeah.
Well, I think maybe from a commission perspective, because when he's taking the photographs, of course, he's taking photographs of the wooden crosses. And once those wooden crosses have been replaced with the permanent stones, maybe from the commission's perspective, then they're not relevant anymore, so we just bulk them. Not saying that's correct, but that's maybe what they think that their rationale is.
I think you're very right. I think that's almost certainly, they probably didn't attach the importance to them then that we might, 100 years later. Of course, we're thankful. I mean, even Ivan himself wasn't sure if these photographs were worth keeping. He was, at the end of his life, 1975, he was 81 years old. Is anyone going to be interested in these photos? Was his thought, and thankfully a relative said, well, someone will be, yeah, let's give it to the Imperial War Museum.
Questions?
How many official photographers may there have been around here?
So we're doing the work that Ivan did. Initially there were 3. There was him with a guy called Bert Haddon and, what's his name, Albert Roper? Frederick. I think it's called Frederick Roper. And initially they would go out with another chap called, I think, MacDonald. But there were 3 main photographers. But as time went by, of course, there were so many more requests coming in that they couldn't cover it all. So increasingly more people were drafted in to help do the photography work from within the Graves Registration Commission, or the DGRE at the time. So I think Ivan talks about other people coming on board. And when I looked at the War Graves records in 1917, I could see that a note from Fabian Ware adding more people in, so they had another 9 or 10. I think about 10 people probably doing it by 1917. Yeah.
Thank you. The photographs that people could write for, which must have been
a great comfort that showed the grave and gave some information about where it was. Presumably they had to pay to get that. Do you know if they did or how much it was?
I do. They didn't have to pay anything. So this was really a really thoughtful enterprise, knowing that they didn't want anyone to go without. So see, a lot of people might not have been able to afford to pay for a photo. I mean, you had to pay to have an epitaph put on the stone afterwards.
Word, I think.
Something like that, yeah. But for the photographs, no, it was all covered by the Red Cross, defrayed by the Joint Committee for the Red Cross. They covered it, so that was for free. If you wanted to get the cross back, so what happened to all the wooden crosses? So some of them you'll find in churches and places like that in the UK now. And again, the percentage of wooden crosses that survive is tiny compared to how many there would have been. And yeah, I mean, if you wanted to get the cross back, you had to pay for that. And most people didn't. So a lot of those got burnt. Firewood.
One question? No? You, Mark?
Well, all right then. Yes, I will chuck the question in. Jeremy, is there also a letter archive, or is it mainly the diaries? Were any of his relatives keeping letters home? And did he come home with a collection of souvenirs? Are there shell cases? Or was he sending stuff home during the war?
There were lots of postcards of all sorts of things. Sometimes you'd get an interesting postcard. There's one in a German cemetery where the Kaiser was there, and he sent that. I think he got it off a German prisoner or something, gave it to him, and he then sent that home. When I went to Sutton Archives, I did find it was a cross, as in a Christian cross, carved from like a bullet casing. Now, I don't know if that was from Ivan, or I think it might have been his brother, Athelstan, who was in the Royal Army Medical Corps. But yeah, there were a lot of letters he sent home, and when I wrote the book, I did draw on letters sent to his mother, sent to his sisters, particularly Viola. I mean, he sent letters to his other sisters, but I don't really have, maybe I have one or two, but mostly to Viola, because Viola also lived into the 1970s, and her archive is even bigger than Ivan's in some respects, in terms of she was a prolific writer and kept hold of a lot of stuff. Lots of postcards of all sorts of places. Yeah.
Jan?
Did he also come to the Ypres Salient in the late 20s, early 30s? And would he have taken any pictures then?
Not that I know of. I don't have any record of him coming back beyond 1920. I do have a record of him attending what would you call it, a reunion of people that work with the GRU, the Graves Registration Units, dating from 1926, which was being hosted by Fabian Ware. It was like a posh dinner. I think that was in the UK though. That was amongst some of the stuff that I found at the Imperial War Museum. Signed, and it was signed. There was like a menu there, and it was signed by everyone that was there. And it had an order of service of what was there, and Fabian Ware gave the address, I think. I think that was 1926, but in terms of coming back, not that I know of.
It's
one that I actually often think about and would love to know the answer. So if a family received a photograph, so let's say it's a mother and father, they receive a photograph of the grave of their son. Let's say it's 1916.
Yep.
But between 1916 and 1918, their son's grave is completely destroyed and the body has been blown to pieces. Are they then informed again that, I'm sorry, your son is now missing? Do you know that?
That's a really good question.
Because that's something I really often think about, because we're a bit weird like that.
Well, I gave at least a couple of examples of, in this talk, of graves where Ivan had taken a photo. I mean, there's the one of a chap called Gosling with a Hampshire regiment, right? Buried in Hyde Park Corner in Plug Street. Now, just because Ivan took a photo of it doesn't mean that photo ever went to the relatives. I mean, you'd think that it probably did, but not necessarily. And I think with that photo, there's an argument that you could have. I mean, part of me wonders if I should be contacting the War Graves Commission to say, shouldn't you put a gravestone in Hyde Park Corner Cemetery with like in Maple Copse and railway dugouts as well, it says known to be buried in this cemetery. Or believed or known, believed to be buried or known to be buried, inscribed on the top of the grave. So there's a record that the person is buried there. They just don't know where because the original grave was destroyed. And obviously with Maple Copse, which was the first image in my, it was just a complete wasteland of destruction. But enough of the graves had been well recorded that they knew they were there before they were blown up, so they were able to put them back. If you go there, you'll notice that they're arranged in alphabetical order, which wouldn't otherwise happen. But yeah, no. Yes, I suppose that would be a bit odd if you had a picture of the grave, and then you discovered that they were on the memorial to the missing.
You see in the inquiry files, often people at the end of the war are writing because they want directions and such like to where is the cemetery I'd like to come out now. And then you see a letter coming back in many occasions saying, I'm really sorry, it's gone now. And you can also work out that people must have been working this out by default because they were talking to friends and neighbours who were receiving next of kin verification cards. They're flooding out from the commission in 1919 where you're having to check off all of the information, is it correct? And clearly some people were saying, well, hang on, like Bert down the road has got one about his son, but nothing's come to us. And they're writing and they're finding out that way. So it's a kind of slight default mechanism as well there. Yeah.
I did find, in the Sutton archive, I did find some letters, one or two, written to Ivan from people that were looking for a grave that they couldn't find. And did Ivan could he shed any light on it? And I know Ivan, from what I have learned of him, would have done all he could to have tried to help. But yeah, with the enormity of it all, the complexity of it all, and it was often very difficult.
No more questions? No? Okay, well, before we wrap up and thank Jeremy again, just announcing the next talk, which is in a fortnight in Canterbury, and where Rob Troublane, who's a volunteer at the Flanders Fields Museum, but who's also the former responsible, well, he was the only one, so he was responsible for the maintenance of the Belgian war graves. So he will talk at the University of Kent on the Belgian war graves. But for those who are around tomorrow morning, Mark Connolly is going to do a guided tour in St. George's Memorial Church at 10:30. Free to all?
Indeed, free to all.
Free to all. Which is also kind of a gesture to thank the Friends of St. George's Memorial Church who are co-sponsoring our series of talks, just like the Western Front Association. So I think that now all my duties have been performed, apart from Thanking Jeremy again for the wonderful talk.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.